Welcome everyone here today on behalf of SunTrust and University of South Florida. In the spirit of Matthew McConaughey, we're going to get started. All right. This is a very interesting topic. One, being a banker, I'm extraordinarily excited because it's a component of our business that obviously is very important to us. But on a national level, it's extremely important to it as well. The funny thing about cybersecurity is I'm sitting up here right now with an iPhone sandwiched between a glass and a sugar thing with light pouring onto my script because we weren't able to get our lighting working. So in provision in cybersecurity, we're going to have my cell phone light the way for us this afternoon. In addition to not knowing a whole lot on the technical aspects about cybersecurity, I was talking to Dr. Singer this morning, who also has a 4-year-old, and I asked him, I said, hey, is cybersecurity hiding your iPad from your 4-year-old? He said, man, it's a little more robust than that. So that's about the education I had on cybersecurity before I started. But before we get started today, I want to recognize Dr. Judy Ginshaft, President of University of South Florida. Welcome, as always. Go Bulls, right? Go Bulls. Any government and elected officials want to welcome this morning. SunTrust clients and guests and board members, members of the Board of Governors, USF Board of Trustees, and USF Foundation Board. We want to talk about cybersecurity today, and I'm really excited simply because, to have a guest like we have today is somewhat extraordinary. Many of you have read his books, but I'm going to talk a little bit about cybersecurity and kind of set the stage. It's simply a growing concern in all sectors of the global economy today, so it's really appropriate that we have this venue today to talk about this very, very urgent and a meaningful topic. I think all of us were exposed, at least through knowledge, by the Target breach recently. Some of us in this room probably had the experience of getting your credit card changed, et cetera. I did. And it's interesting how quickly these things can happen in our economy, and more importantly, how it affects all of us. But today, we're really pleased to welcome Dr. Peter Warren Singer. Today's event, we're really especially thankful that he made himself available to us to share in what we call an informal breakfast discussion. Also joining Dr. Singer with me today on stage is Dr. Ralph Wilcox, Executive Vice President of University of South Florida and Provost. Welcome. The format today is designed to stimulate conversation and serve as a forum for sharing concerns and ideas, so I encourage all of your participation. In a moment, I'm going to ask Dr. Singer to offer some opening remarks. Dr. Wilcox and I will open today's dialogue with a question or two, and then we'll invite you to join the conversation by offering your own questions and comments, using the microphones that would be placed throughout the room. But first, allow me to briefly introduce Dr. Peter Warren Singer. Dr. Singer is a senior fellow and director of the Center of 21st Century Society Security and Intelligence at the Brookings Institution, and the co-author of a recent released Cybersecurity, Cyber War, What Everyone Needs to Know. In Brookings' 95-year history, he is the youngest scholar named Senior Fellow and is considered one of the world's leading experts on changes in the 21st century warfare. He has been named by CNN to their New Guard list of next generation of newsmakers and Smithsonian Institution National Portrait Gallery of the 100 leading innovators in the nation. Dr. Singer served as coordinator of the Obama 2008 campaign's Defense Policy Task Force and has worked as a consultant for the U.S. Department of Defense along with the FBI. He's been quoted in virtually every U.S. newspaper and magazine and delivers talks at venues ranging from the U.S. Congress to over 60 universities around the world. He has also provided commentary on military affairs for nearly every major TV and radio outlet. An author of several books, Dr. Singer has been named Defense News 100 Most Influential People in Defense Issues by Foreign Policy magazine to the top 100 global thinkers list whose ideas are most influenced the world in the year. It's my pleasure now to welcome Dr. Singer and invite him to begin tomorrow morning's dialogue with opening remarks.
I want to thank you for the kind introduction and also thank SunTrust both for hosting us here, and also I need to be nice to them because they hold the note to my house. And then finally to the university for bringing us together around this very important issue right now, but as I'll get to in my remarks, I think a even more important issue in the years ahead, thinking about it in terms of both on the national security level, the economic security level, but also in terms of business development questions. As was mentioned, I have a new book out, and what we tried to do in the book is provide a easy to read yet deeply informative resource book that's been missing on this critical issue. And it's structured around the key questions of cybersecurity: how it all works, why it all matters, and what can we do. And along the way, we try to take readers on a tour of what we see as the important but also entertaining characters and issues of cybersecurity. Everything from who really is the anonymous group to that funny time that Pakistan accidentally kidnapped all the world's cute cat videos for a couple of hours. Now, this idea of focusing on the human is important because it's what makes this space so interesting, but it's also what we've gotten frequently so wrong. And when I say we, I'm talking about how it's dealt with in business, how it's dealt with in academia, how it's dealt with in the media. It's too often portrayed as simply a technology problem when it's a people problem. Now, you can see this in the tech support world. There's the old joke about PEBCAC, that the problem exists between chair and keyboard. But cybersecurity is not just an issue of important technical fixes and new tools that we need to adopt. It's also about the very fact, and we've seen this in some of these breaches recently, that if organizations and individuals aren't willing to invest in securing themselves, then they will remain insecure. Now, as I'll get into in the main speech later, the most important thing that I believe we can do is a mentality shift from fear and ignorance, which leads us to be taken in by hucksters and silver bullet solutions and a hope for man on cyber horseback to come rescue us, to what we need to be doing is working more towards resilience. Defense and deterrence are good, but as long as we use the internet, we will always have risk in our cyber lives, from criminals, from enemies, and from plain old-fashioned bad luck. The key is how can you power through them and bounce back quickly from any setbacks. Keep calm and carry on should be the mantra. Well, this isn't interesting. We'll see who's calling for you. Or someone didn't like my remarks. I've never had that happen before.
Hey, cybersecurity.
Maybe it's anonymous, didn't like my remarks. So with that, just when I said keep calm and carry on, we will power through that interruption. We will be resilient in our speech. But what I'm talking about is this notion of resilience shouldn't just apply to the technology that you're using in your organization. It should also apply to our psyche. Now, the people problem is also important, I think, in particular for all of us gathered here at USF and the broader agenda of the new program, because it leads to two new additional ways to think about this. Is it a cyber issue that gathers us here today, or is it a human capital and human opportunity issue? So in the book, for example, we have a series of action items that range from what we should be doing on global negotiations to defense strategy to how can you better protect yourself online, which then zoom back to some of these military strategy sides, which in terms of in the section on how can you better protect yourself, one Army officer put it to us very succinctly, quote, "Stop being so damn stupid on computers." But the chapters that I think we can focus on today is one that's entitled Find the It Crowd. The problem could be thought about this way. In 2008, there were just 40 people in the entire Department of Homeland Security working on cybersecurity issues full-time. By the end of last year, the force had grown to over 400 inside the agency and another 1,500 contractors. But even as that force had grown 50 times over in size, it still wasn't enough, and the agency now plans to add another 400. So take what's happening just at DHS and multiply that across every single other government agency that has a link to cyber issues in some way, shape, or form. whether it's on the national level, the state level, the local government level, as well as all the different businesses that play in this space, and you see an emerging policy problem, which is a people problem. Cybersecurity is not just a question of what or how, but who. As one industry consultant explained, quote, "The cybersecurity market has grown so fast that it's outstripping available labor pools." So how big is this gap exactly? There was a study done by the Center for Strategic International Studies. It's entitled "A Human Capital Crisis in Cybersecurity," which, the title pretty much puts it well. And it argued that the U.S. government only has roughly 3 to 10% of the cybersecurity professionals that it needs. Now, if that's the case for the U.S. government, with its resources that it's been throwing at this problem for the last 4 years, imagine, again, what's the scale of this at the local, state government level, at the various businesses out there. By one estimate, as many as 1 million or more new cybersecurity workers will be needed inside the United States by 2017 and beyond. Now, this cyber people problem is not just one of raw numbers. It's also quality. Indeed, one survey of IT hiring managers found that only 40% were satisfied with the quality of the new people that they were hiring. What is more, this issue bodes to get worse. It's not just that cybersecurity needs are growing in terms of the people who work directly in it day to day, that is the IT crowd inside the IT department. Even the managers now need this kind of hands-on expertise because they're dealing with it. So for example, in business, 70% of business executives, not 70% of CTOs or CIOs, but 70% of execs in general have made some kind of cybersecurity decision for their company, despite the fact that no major MBA program teaches on it. So this is a good/bad news story. The classic answer to a labor crunch is to throw money at the problem. And the same has happened in cybersecurity. For those with the skills, it's a very good time to be in or entering this field. For example, salaries for professionals in this area, according to one study, found that roughly half make at least $100,000 or more. That good news for the labor force is then in turn bad news for the organizations that are repeatedly finding themselves bidding against each other for this tiny labor pool. And then in turn, that's good news for schools that can position themselves and their students for one of the most in-demand, highest paying, and rapidly growing fields out there, which is, I think, I'm seeing people nod in this front table here, which is why there's so much interest at USF. Now, this leads to, though, a second question in terms of the human. The question of opportunity at the regional level. This is a booming industry area. The numbers, they tend to vary. They're sort of squishy. But at least according to one study, the global cybersecurity market is worth $120 billion by 2017. To give you a sense of the growth, that's up from $63 billion in 2011. Or if you move beyond these kind of market estimates, the level of activity can be seen in lots of different ways. For example, we've seen the recent multi-billion-dollar acquisition of Mandiant. Roughly 15% of all the mergers and acquisitions in the defense and aerospace field are cybersecurity M&As right now. Or you can look at it on the government side. In the Pentagon's budget in 2011, the word cyber was used 4 times. In this year's Pentagon budget, the word cyber is used 147 times. So it gives you a sense of the scale of growth here. So there's huge opportunity, particularly at the regional level, but there's also a caveat. What matters is not who's in at the start, but who's the ultimate winner in the end. For example, go back to the history of automobiles. At the turn of the last century, Long Island and Syracuse made just as many automobiles as Detroit did, followed by Richmond and Jacksonville, Florida. Similarly, Philadelphia was the home of the computer. Silicon Valley is the winner of the computer revolution. So what are the features that allow certain regions to thrive, particularly when it comes to this idea of innovation hubs? And you can see these examples. They range back in history to Florence under the Medici to Silicon Valley today. The history shows that innovation and the resulting spoils for industry tends to cluster in certain places at certain times. Innovation and entrepreneurship rely on, at the end of the day, an ecosystem of firms, both suppliers and customers, ecosystem of education, universities, community colleges, all the way down to K through 12, government agencies, and trade associations, all systematically aligning themselves and providing incentives for experimentation and discovery and growth. For example, I'm originally from North Carolina. And it's like that old Saturday Night Live joke, whenever there was an education or business or whatever ranking that came out of the states, we were always happy that there was a South Carolina. Hope we don't have some old ball coach fans here. We had, when I was growing up, no right to be at the center of an innovation cluster. But our state government, working together with our business community, did something really brilliant, particularly when the textile industry was going down. They fostered an innovation cluster around what's now known as the Research Triangle Park, where you brought together over 130 different R&D facilities and helped North Carolina become the hub of the global biotech industry, which then went on to benefit the rest of the state to make it one of the fastest growing states out there. This didn't happen overnight. It included steady and consistent state policy, investment tax credits, quasi-governmental, sector-specific agencies, business, education, all working together. So I would urge today, when we're looking at parallels for cybersecurity, a focus, again, not just on the zeros and ones, but what are the key features of innovation? It's good education, STEM education all the way down to the K-12 level up to the universities. It's public-private partnerships. It's building the key enablers for industry, especially small business, network building opportunities, building a regional brand. And finally, and maybe it's one that's not too hard here, I'm from DC, so thinking about the weather right now, it's an atmosphere that's open and hospitable to outsiders and makes them want to move there and stay there. So with that laid out before you, I very much applaud the efforts of the team here and what they're trying to pull together around this crucially important issue, and look forward to talking with you further, both about that, but also the broader issues of cybersecurity and cyber war today. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, as we talked about, we're going to, Dr. Wilcox and I will open up with some questions to Dr. Singer, then we'll open up to the audience. Dr. Singer, I'm really happy you took the human angle in this, because it's a fascinating element, and I think the businesses we're all in are very people dependent, and the better talent you have on the field, the better your business does. I got just a quick question, more forward thinking. What do you see as the next big security threat that's kind of emerging today, and how well are businesses equipped to deal with those emerging threats?
That's a really great question, and in the close of the book we look at what are the emerging trends in the internet, and then that's an easy way of pointing towards where the threats will be next, because the threats will follow the way we use the internet. And there's one that's already happening right now, and then I'll hit one that moves next, and then kind of existential level. The one that's already happening right now is essentially the move towards mobile and how we use it, you know, your phone there, to the threats that follow it. So a couple years ago, if you were looking at malware, there was 0 that were designed to go after mobile devices. Now, the last study I saw, it was roughly 20% and growing. And it's even tougher for, it's not just the targeting, it's tougher to defend on mobile devices, because people are, they're easier to be tricked. It's harder to, for example, check out that link and make sure it's really to the one that you see, et cetera. They can't pack in as much defenses inside the system. So mobile is both, gives us all these wonderful opportunity, but it's a new threat area. That's happening right now. The one next is the Internet of Things, and I'll talk about this further in the talk, but it's essentially using the internet to not just you and I carry on conversations, but to control physical objects out there in the world. It's the example of your car communicating to your thermostat Google just spent $2 billion on a thermostat business. Not a regular thermostat, it's a smart thermostat. So your car communicates to your thermostat, hey, he's 10 minutes out, change the power setting, which has been at the most efficient level because it's linked into the smart power grid, to the setting that you particularly like it at. So it's a huge change, it's transformation for the internet, but more importantly for us, it runs the world around us, but we're seeing the threats potentially follow into that, and the stakes are much higher. So we have seen in testing car hacking, where people have taken over the control of a car contrary to what the driver wants to do. That raises the level of, it's not just, oh my goodness, my target car was taken. It really moves you into kinetic change. But we're gonna, the Internet of Things is this huge industry. We're not gonna move away from it. The final kind of meta level threat is actually us to the internet itself. And this is where it links into the Snowden affair. The internet runs on trust, and there have been a series of actions that are threatening that trust. Some of it's this massive wave of cybercrime. Some of it is our own governmental actions pursuing a certain kind of terrorism, though, that have rebounded back to hit American business and then and harm trust in them. And then third, it's the push by authoritarian governments like Russia and China to put more governmental controls over the underlying governance of the internet. So the worry that I have is that the internet that we've all grown to know and love, this open, fairly transparent place that it's weirdly structured, but it works. Mm-hmm. That's not going to be the one that our kids inherit because of the trust factor being taken out of it.
Wow. Thank you very much. Now I'm very nervous. Go ahead, Dr. Wilcox.
Dr. Singer, again, thank you for being with us this morning and setting the context for today's conversation. In your opening remarks, I was particularly intrigued by your call for executive education and training relative to cybersecurity. What is it that a university president or a bank president or a utility CEO or hospital CEO really needs to know today about cybersecurity?
Well, you can think about it. So one would be change of mentality, and by the very, so we've got a selection bias here. By the very fact that you're all in the room, you're not in the category of what I'm going to talk about. So the first is it's too often in leadership roles we hear people who delight in their Ludditism. So in the book, the example that there's two that sort of should jump out and scare you. One is the former Secretary of Homeland Security. She's now the Chancellor of the California University System, and she told us how she doesn't use email, and in fact hadn't used social media for over a decade, which, if you know, that's basically saying you've never used it. I mean, and the reason she said wasn't because of a security issue. She just felt it wasn't useful. The Supreme Court justice who moved from the executive branch to the Supreme Court justice who told us that they, quote, hadn't yet gotten around to email. They'll get around there eventually, just hadn't yet gotten around to it. And so one is, and that you could see the same business, et cetera. One, it's within your responsibility area. Again, whether this person who's, DHS is in charge of cybersecurity on the civilian side, to the Supreme Court is going to be making decisions in the upcoming year on everything from the constitutionality of the NSA activities to net neutrality questions. And so if you've got that kind of mentality of, much like the person who was, we had someone else who used this, they were a White House official a former White House official who, talked about it as, oh, it's like programming the clock on your VCR. And you're like, whoa, you still have a VCR, let alone the. But the point I'm getting is you can't be effective in that role if that's your mentality. Technology is too important. So one is change that mentality. The second is you have responsibility to have at least a base level of knowledge and awareness so that so it's not just attitude, you have to have a base level of knowledge and awareness so that you're making good decisions for your company, for your university. How much should we be, you are making these decisions, you're just doing so from a standpoint of ignorance, which means you're more likely to make a bad decision or be taken in by a huckster. So it's, how much should my company be spending on this? Who should I be hiring? How should I be dealing with vendors, customers? If there's an incident, how should I communicate it? If you're not comfortable in this space, if the very words are magic to you, you're not going to be effective. The diplomatic example we use in the book is, so China is obviously a key player in this field when it comes to intellectual property theft. I'm betting that a number of businesses in this room have been targeted. So a U.S. government official going off to negotiate with the Chinese on cyber issues actually asked us what an ISP was. That's like going to negotiate with the Soviets and not knowing what an ICBM is. But it's a funny parallel, though, that I make that because my mom, who's a retired nurse, she knows what an ICBM is. She grew up in the Cold War. She doesn't know what an ISP is, even though it's more important to her day to day. So we got to change we need to be comfortable with the basic terms and definitions, a lot like how we were with these strange things back in the Cold War. The final reason why senior execs need to be smart on it is they're targeted the most for cyber attack, and they're consistently behind the most simple mistakes that allow the attacker in. Actually, a study found that senior executives are 50% more likely to be behind a breach than the junior folks. Wow. So they're actually the problem set here. It makes it difficult for the lower folks to tell them that, though.
Madam President, you heard that?
As stated before, there's a microphone in the center of the room, and feel free to step up at your own convenience and ask a question.
Dr. Singer, Bill Loomis, retired DOD and adjunct at USF. What resources are the financial institutions directing at the problem of phishing and the rogue logins and so forth?
So it's a great question, and I'll get a little bit to it later, and you actually may want to weigh in, or we've got some other...
Notice I got up and started to walk away when you asked that question, right?
So you framed it in terms of the financial institutions, and it's crucially important that when we're thinking about cybercrime, that we disaggregate both the attackers and their intent and the targets that they're going after, because too often we lump them all together, and there's very different goals, very different groups of attackers. So, recently we've seen everything from highly advanced, highly organized, transnational groups to, no, this is a couple of dudes just trying to steal off of a wireless network, and they were focused just on this one store and they got in that way. What are they going after? Are they going after a data set of hundreds of thousands of credit card numbers where their intent is not actually to use each card, but rather to put it on the open market and sell it? And I hate to tell you, but do you know what your Target card went for?
No, I don't.
The going rate right now is $3.
Man.
Which also points to the business of cybercrime is when we hear things like 40 million, there was a case of a guy who was behind the theft of $40 million worth of cybercrime, but what did he make per year? 42,000.
Gosh.
And everyone's like, wow, he actually should have gone into another field. But it's a lot like, this is exactly like other parts of crime. Look at the drug field, the difference between what the kingpin, who's at the top of the organization, makes versus what the different specialized players make all the way down to the lower level. But then the second part is the target set. The financial industry actually does, and I'll get to this in the broader speech, I believe a much better job at its own individual company security and more importantly at the industry level than other fields. And when I say at the industry level, a big thing is because it shares information in a way some of the other industries don't. And that's because the incentives are more directly in play for it than some of the other fields. And it might be something for the panel discussion later, but there's a reason why banks are doing better at this than retail or infrastructure or healthcare, and it's because the incentives are there. One, the numbers are real and meaningful. Second, it's the role of government and how it's structured things so that, just why do you have that second number on the back of your credit card? That's not because the bank or the credit card company thinks it's cool. It's because of who will bear responsibility in terms of these breaches. And if you're following the rules, it falls back on the institution, not on you individually. And so that's why the institutions are putting the efforts in of these extra layers of security. Why is it that your ATM has, what we think of as multi-factor security? So you've got the physical object, but you also have the password that you remember in your head. That's again because the bank is incentivized to get it right in a way that we don't have, for example, multi-factor with some of these other. That's what Target only now is moving towards this belatedly because it wasn't incentivized in the same way.
Dr. Singer, I was part of the original cadre that tried to stand up U.S. Air Force Cyber Command with the 24th. And when we were looking at doctrine, we struggled with attackers and defenders in Title 10 and Title 50 because most times it was the same person. They just changed under what title they worked on. Do you see something now, fast forward 3 years later, maybe we always would joke we needed Title 60, that the line was too hard for such a blurred area?
So it's a really great question, and it's a tough question right now, and this is very much almost like a Washington D.C. kind of question of what we're talking about is the very different legal authorities, essentially at the end of the day for military activity versus intelligence activity, and that's the Title 10, Title 50, and where this comes together, particularly in this space, is right now the director of the NSA is simultaneously double-hatted as the commander of Cyber Command, and the resources can move over in a fuzzy way. I'm one of the folks that I was actually arguing this pre-Snowden, and now I think it's even more the case, that double-hatting is a bad idea. It's a bad idea for a variety of reasons. One is a Snowden reason is there's an irony that the original reason why they double-hatted them was so that the commander of this new thing called Cyber Command could speak with greater authority, a louder voice, because they would also have the old hat of the NSA. There's a reverse now post-Snowden where if you looked at every single newspaper article when it was announced the new director of both roles, every single newspaper article said new director of NSA nominated. The Cyber Command side was just forgotten about because that's all that's interested. And I guarantee you during the congressional hearings for the nomination, it's an admiral named Mike Rogers. It'll all be it'll be 90% NSA questions and not this crucial, important military command that's standing up. You also have some other issues. One, I'm the son of an Army lawyer, and it pains me when in that Title 60 is used in this space, and it's also used related to the big command down here in the special operations community, where we kind of jokingly call it a Title 60 thing. Well, it's not. Legally, it's not. So what we've been in is with these double hatting, we've been within the letter of the law, but not the spirit of the law. And those who originally created that division would be shocked at what we're doing. Next is a question of time. No matter how good an individual is, splitting their time between two very important agencies is not good management practice. So to go back to, let's just keep beating up on the old ball coach. It's a lot like in the sports field of having your coach and your general manager in the same role. It very rarely works out. But in this case, it's actually beyond that, because when you're talking about a military role and intelligence community role, it's actually like being the coach of a football team and the general manager of a baseball team simultaneously. There's added reasons on this, and the final would be where I see the ultimate evolution of the military side of this. I believe that we're on the arc towards it becoming, if not its own individual operational command, a la the special operations community, or maybe one day even its own service on the military side when you think of cyber. And you would never say, oh goodness, you know what, Special Operations Command and the CIA operate in many of the same places. We ought to just double hat both of them. But because this is this mysterious place of cyber, and you have that limited skill set of only a couple of people know it well, we somehow think it's appropriate in this space. And I think ultimately we'll move away from it. Unfortunately, that was one of the recommendations of the commission that advised President Obama post-Snowden, and unfortunately it was one of the recommendations that was ignored. And I think in part because White House officials just did not understand the nuances of it.
Dr. Singer, thank you. Quick question, if I could take it back to general business, MBA, that sort of thought process. Do you think it's time that this profession is professionalized to the extent of RSA, LinkedIn, Sony, none of which had CISOs at the time they had their first public breaches? It was only afterwards. And so there seems to be a disconnect. Also in an industry that has probably 20 or 30 frameworks, is it time to have a generally accepted set like accountants do? Professionalizing to me would raise it to the level of C-levels that would then at least understand it and appreciate it and know that they had some responsibility because it's so ubiquitous to their own financial stability.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think I'd agree with you in terms of I mean, clearly there's much more that can be done to turn this into a professional community, and all that means, you know, not just in terms of the terminology and the vetting, but the organizational side, et cetera. That's clearly a need. But what we would want to be careful is that it doesn't become like some of those other fields that you mentioned, where it's a guild and I understand it and it's my turf and it's not for the rest of you. Just hand it over to me and we in the guild run it. Because kind of way of saying it is, it should be professionalized, but it's also a field that needs to be normalized. That the other C-level execs, or to use the military side, not just Cyber Command, but the other generals who are making decisions that constantly link to it, understand it, have the confidence to interact with it. So what we need to be careful of is that because there's so much opportunity here, you have a growing pie, but people are going to fight over it. And so, in my own argument would be, no one single actor should control it. We can make the same in the academic space. The point of the book is that we need to better understand this from the cyber side, but in turn, the cyber side needs to better understand these fields and domains out there. So you want it to be, in another way, a multidisciplinary effort from the academic perspective, because whether you're in law or you're in the business school or you're in journalism now. You need to be making these links back and forth, and in turn, the people working on the cyber issues have they're constantly making decisions that cross up on legal questions or business operational questions or whatnot. Or the question for these recent breaches with retail, was the damage caused exclusively by the attacker and what they took, or was also the damage caused by the company's PR strategies? So it kind of a media relations side issue. And so what I'm getting at is definitely raise the level of professionalization, but don't allow it to turn into a guild-like exclusionary topic.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed your remarks, and I'd appreciate if you could comment on the circumstance where there are thousands of jobs available both in private industry and government, and yet there's a large gap in filling those jobs, and what impact certification and perhaps more importantly clearances have on that gap, and whether you also believe that programs to take retraining of veterans coming home that already have clearances and already have background would be a good way to fill that gap.
So there's a whole chapter on the book, so I'm not going to try and sum it up, but other than say, like any other cyber problem, it's a multi-pronged approach. And so if we're thinking about this as a pool that's too small, then you've got to come at it in a number of different ways. One is to widen the pipeline of what's pushing into that pool. And that's the discussion around the education system. And like any other pipeline, you've got to be thinking about it at the entirety of the flow. So not just at the tertiary, at the university level, but also, frankly, going back. I made sure to mention K through 12 and the gap in STEM. I mean, that's where the U.S. stands in our science and mathematics. Is there's no other word for it, pathetic. And it's becoming not just a business issue, but a national security issue, because that's what's helped us be a leading power, and we're not setting the table to be able to do so in the next generation. We have institutions that compete at a world-class level. Our top kids compete at a world-class level. The problem is the 80% below. And at that point where, you look at the various rankings and we're like 32nd and 34th in math. I mean, it's bad. So pipeline. Another is, as you were talking about, which is find other sources to, so not just the pipeline that's feeding the pool, but how do I find new sources to come into it, alternative. So one, as you mentioned, was vets, and definitely this is a space where that can be done. It's actually a deep concern, ironically, for the military itself, because it's getting in the position of kind of where it was, back in the day with pilots. I train you up, and then you can get a much better paying job outside. That's the same on the civilian as well. I mentioned that $100,000 amount for the private sector. That's not what you're getting paid inside. And so I was recently speaking with someone in the Air Force, and they face this sort of irony. On one hand, cyber is the fastest, it and unmanned aerial systems is the fastest growing part of the Air Force personnel side. They're also the most operational. They're doing the most stuff right now, but they're also in demand outside. But essentially what we want to do is make the off-ramps better for veterans that want to leave. You brought up the third, which is clearance. I'll push back a little bit against that. Clearance, security clearance is important in certain parts of the sector, but not in others. So it shouldn't be a limiting factor. And second, we actually overclassify a lot of things in this space, and it maybe links back to the past question. So, for example, I was speaking with an exec from a bank who he was the CEO of a bank, and he was not allowed to know about an ongoing attack inside his company because of a security clearance question. His CIO had clearance but couldn't talk to the CEO about it. And at that point, that's a dysfunctional situation. The final thing in this space is, and it's the opposite of the vet side, is that we've also got to figure out a way to bring in talent that doesn't fit our conventional sense of what a good young business professional looks like. Top cyber talent doesn't arrive at job fairs wearing a suit and the like, and we've got to find a way to better draw that in. So for example, a lot of companies sponsor or are part of these cyber competitions that helps them find top talent out there. One of the top IT guys at a major defense contractor used to be a car mechanic, but he won one of these cyber competitions. So finding that talent in other places. This though loops back for government. I think it'll be easier for corporation. For government now post Snowden, they have a major human capital problem because essentially, I go back to the issue of trust. Edward Snowden is a name, if you say it at NSA headquarters, people spit on the ground. You say it at a computer science lab at a university, and people find him pretty admirable. And the ability of government agencies to do recruiting at some of these associations and conferences, like Black Hat and some of the others, it's not what it was because people are mad. And it's not just kind of the hacker. I'm just back from the Bay Area, from Silicon Valley, and they are peeved, to put it very kindly, at the U.S. at the intelligence community. And the reason why is because they've lost, by their estimate, $180 billion worth of revenue because of NSA activities and the disclosures of it. You'd be peeved too if you lost that much revenue. So they see, and then now they're seeing these efforts, whether it was the back-end hacking to Yahoo recently and the webcams. A senior exec there described them as being, in quote, he said, I knew I was in an arms race with the Chinese. I didn't realize I was in an arms race with my own government. And so that talent pool, there's going to be more people going into that side than being willing to join government agencies the way they were previously. And that's another one of these blowback consequences that frankly, it's a shame they weren't thought of before we did some of this stuff.
In this environment, whenever I hear discussion in this environment, I get the impression that we're always playing preventive defense. We're always trying to be reactive to this issue. So is there any way, either now or in the future, that we can turn the tables around and play more offense and try to identify where the hacking is coming from, or the possible source of the hacking? Number two, cyber criminals, are they impossible to catch? And if they're caught, what is the stiffest penalties that they face today? And is there any precedence today for prosecution of cyber criminals?
So the offense question, and I'll touch on this later in the big speech. You guys are hitting all the speech points. I shouldn't just give it. And it echoes back to an earlier question. There is not the clear, distinct line between offense, defense, the way there might be in traditional fields, and that, for example, if someone's attacking you, you want to understand where they're coming from, and you might want to get inside their own networks and the like. So there's not that clear, distinct line, but we need to be careful of what sounds and feels good versus is actually effective. So there's a very active industry right now. In fact, there's so much investment, venture capital going into it, that the Wall Street people even believe it might be a bubble, and what's known as the hackback industry. And it's basically companies that say, yeah, don't waste your time defending yourself. I'll go after the guys attacking you and shut them down. Sounds like a really appealing idea. Break down the business model of it, though, and you quickly see why it's appealing for the hackback company and not you. Because essentially, if you face a world where there's not just one attacker out there, there's not just tens of attackers, not just hundreds, you're talking about thousands. So if their business model is to take down the attacker and be paid by the attacker that they take down, essentially all you're doing is now, paying off a vigilante with a endless series of people to go after, and you're not giving yourself any breathing space. Oh great, I take down one. Well, if I've got 30, so I was at a major defense company, they knew of 30 different advanced persistent threat campaigns going against them at that time. There was also a number they, of course, estimated they didn't know, but so okay, they could pay someone to go after that 30. I mean, you can see quickly it's a business model that's not effective for defending yourself. Second is it's deeply problematic from a legal standpoint, and even more so from a political standpoint. What happens when you have private companies, the equivalent of a cyber Blackwater, going out and attacking other entities that are after you? Well, maybe we're cool with that if it's just a bunch of teenagers inside the United States. What happens when that American company attacks that Chinese government agency? Or what happens when it gets inside the network of that British cyber group that was using the hosting of SunTrust's European branch? You can quickly see how things could get escalatory, but even more so misinterpreted, because it's not someone wearing name tags, and they're often using resources outside their country and the like. So it's as exciting as it is for that field, people on the government side are deeply concerned about it. Then you had the question of, have we caught any cyber criminals? Most definitely. We've caught many of them for all sorts of different crimes, whether it be credit card fraud, to their money laundering, to their links to pornography, you name it. There's been people prosecuted in lots of different ways. It actually points out that too often this is a space where we say things like, in the online world, governments don't matter. You hear that sort of said a lot. The reality is, even though there's an online world, everything in it links back to some physical machine and some person that is within some government jurisdiction. The question is, what are the laws in that physical jurisdiction that they're inside of, and what is the incentive of that government to go after them? So that's the problem of, so in some situations we're seeing good prosecution and cooperation, and others, that government has a incentive not to go after people within their own area. So as an example, US and China, we could do a lot more on, we actually cooperate pretty well on child pornography. And we've helped bust some global rings. Both governments working together, the people get many, many years put in prison, et cetera. But when we say to the Chinese government, oh goodness, someone broke into this American defense company and stole the jet fighter designs, and we tracked it back to this building in China, can you do something about it? They go, oh goodness, how dare you insult us by saying that's the case? Because it links to other incentives. Much like if the Germans came to us and said, you know what? Someone based out of Maryland was hacking our prime minister's cell phone. That's a breaking of the law inside Maryland. Maryland State Police, can you drop down Fort Meade and go arrest them? That you see, it's this where we get the fuzzy lines.
Wow, this has been absolutely fascinating. And Dr. Singer, thank you so much for your very candid and very plain-spoken speak about a very complex subject. So I'm fascinated to go into the next session.